All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar Beis. To thank the Schwartzbaum family for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos in memory of Rabbi Aaron Schwartzbaum, Aaron Yosef Ben Meir Zichron Livracha, Leah Sol, in the schus of her daughter Ilana Bas Esther's successful surgery and the complete refuah shlema. And for a complete refuah shlema, and the Meretz Hashem, a safe return of our hostages and all of our soldiers. Maya Hoffman, in memory of her father Reuven Ben Emmanuel, and in the merit of Hatzlacha, health and joy for her entire family. Yoel and Sarah Kelman, in honor of the birth of their son, and in memory of Staff Sergeant David Sasuna Shem Yikom Damo. We dedicate our learning this morning Le'ilui Nishmas Staff Sergeant Matan Vinogradov and Warrant Officer Sebastian Chayon. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, their Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, and all of Klal Yisrael, the merit Hashem should be Zocha to Besoros Tovos. So with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem, and exciting new developments ahead of us today as well. In Meretz Hashem, beginning of a new parak. So today's daf is Chaf Aleph 21, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Chaf Amud Beis 20b. And I believe we left off yesterday at Rabbi Shmuel Silber, right? Which is 2, 4, 6, 7 lines up from before it gets wide. So Rabbi Shmuel Silber, Echad Halav Mishlosha Yachzir Lelovis. Well, remember again, we had 2 cases in the Mishnah. Well, we had more than 2 cases in the Mishnah, but 2 cases like this. Case number 1 in the Mishnah is, I'm walking around, I go ahead and I find 3 documents. And all 3 documents have the same borrower named in them with 3 different lenders. 3 different lenders. So the Mishnah said that halacha l'maisa, in that case, we return the documents to the borrower because we assume that it's the borrower. In other words, we saw around the Mishnah, there are 2 different two different possibilities. Better? Thank you. 2 different possibilities. Possibility number 1 is that it's 3 different lenders who went ahead and lost their respective shtaros. Or possibility number 2 is that it's 1 borrower who lost all of his shtaros. So the Gemara Mishnah essentially says, Shmuel says, the greater statistical probability is that it's 1 borrower who lost all of his shtaros. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, we return the documents to the borrower. Okay, good. So Gemara says, because if you would think that these documents belong to the lenders, my by gabi hadadi, so why are they together? In other words, if it's the lenders who indeed lost their documents, why is it that the documents of 3 independent lenders are all coupled together? The Gemara says, Dilma lekiyu minhu azli. Maybe the 3 different lenders were bringing their documents to Beis Din to be certified. That's why they were lost together. To which the Gemara says, Dimakaimi. No, we're dealing with a case of where the documents are already certified. All right. Dilma miyada de safra nafel. So maybe it was the sofer who dropped the documents. In other words, maybe the documents were drafted, certified, the sofer was holding on to them, and it's the sofer who dropped them. So this is very interesting. The Gemara says, Lo mashi inish kiyume biyada de safra. It's not the derech of people to maintain certified documents in the hand of the scribe. It's not the way that it works. In other words, just realistically, like once your document was certified, that was with you. Therefore, again, the greatest probability is that it's the borrower. Since it's the same borrower, Ruvain, named in all 3 documents, that it's him who lost it. Okay. Shlosha shalavu me'echad yachzir l'malos. And then there's the reverse case. What happens if you find 3 documents, and again, all 3 documents are loan documents with different people, but same lender, same Ruvain lender. So in that case, the Mishnah says we give it back to the lender. Says because if you think that it belongs to the borrowers, that it's 3 different borrowers, the Gemara says, my bo'u gabi hadadi. Why are they together? Why are those documents together? Dilma lemichtevin azli. So I'll say, so maybe it's 1 scribe, maybe it's 1 sofer who went ahead and was writing all the documents for 3 different people, to which the Gemara says, Dechsivi bitlas yadi safri. Interesting. the three documents were clearly written by three different scribes. How do you know that? Based on handwriting. So we'll say, so now, obviously you can't say it was dropped by one scribe, so therefore logically, if it's three different scribes, and the only common denominator amongst the shtaros is what? Same lender, so bepashtos, the lender dropped, he had a bundle of loan documents, right? Bundle of loan documents, and he dropped them. Maybe the document was being taken to be certified. The Gemara says, "Malvem mekayim shtare, lo lo mekayim shtare." So the Gemara says, generally, it's the derech of the lender to have the document certified, not the derech of the borrower. Okay, so therefore, both say, so those are our two halachas. So halach number one, you find three documents kind of together that have the same lender mentioned or the same borrower mentioned. Halacha l'maisa, we give that back to the lender or the borrower. Okay, so the Gemara says as follows: Imish imahen symphonos yas. So we'll say, so remember again, a symphone is a receipt. So remember again, now the Gemara is talking about the following case, Mishnah's case, that if you find documents, and together with those documents you find receipts. So let's say, so now I have no recollection as to what happened over here. Was the document paid off, not paid off? So halacha l'maisa, the Mishnah says that wherever you find receipts, we always assume receipts are accurate. Receipts are accurate. Therefore, if you find a receipt that says, the document that you have in your possession was paid, I have no recollection. Halacha l'maisa, we assume whatever is within the receipt is in fact accurate. Okay? So the Gemara says as follows. So we'll say, so now the Gemara is going to quote this shita, and this shita is now going to serve as the basis of our discussion until the end of the parak. So Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba says, Amarav. So Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba says the name of Rav. Simfon hayotze mitachas yedei malve. We'll say, if you have a receipt that literally again is in the possession of the malve, of the lender. Now remember again, who would normally be in possession? Well, okay, let's even though the receipt itself is written in the handwriting of the lender, it's puzzle. Such a document has absolutely no halachic validity. Okay, so we'll say, so now remember, normally who would have the receipt? Right? Who gets the receipt? Right? It's the borrower. Right? The borrower, right? Because remember again, the borrower pays back the debt. How do you know that somebody doesn't go ahead, right? The lender doesn't try to go ahead and collect again. You get a receipt. So in this case, what we're talking about over here is a scenario where the lender has the receipt. So Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba says the lender finds the receipt in his possession. So the Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba says even if that receipt is written in the handwriting of the lender, meaningless. Kimisachik ba'alma. Okay, so the Gemara says, Lomi by ksav b'ksav yad sofer. So we'll say, so now it goes without saying that if this receipt is in the handwriting of the sofer, that is meaningless. Why? Well, this is incredible. Dika l'meimar safra isramile because of. So we'll say, so listen to this, because you could say, it could be, and we'll say, we're used to having access to everything. But, Bepashtos, the Gemara is saying, to have access to a sofer who knows how to write a document is not always easy. So maybe Ruvain the lender figured like this, you know what? Chaim Yankel the sofer is here right now. I don't know when I'm going to find him again. Let me just have him write up a receipt. Let me have him write up a receipt. In other words, this way I have all my documentation, right? I'll get a bundle package. He'll write a receipt. He'll write the get for me, whatever, who knows, right? I'll get a ksuva for the second marriage, whatever. I'll have everything written up now. Let me just get everything now. So we'll say, so then, obviously we don't take it with any, so we don't assume it has any level of validity. Ella, what's the chiddush? Afilu ksav b'ksav yado pasal. Even if the receipt is written in the handwriting of the lender himself, which I both say normally something written in your own handwriting has an even more dramatic level of validity. Even in that case, we assume that the receipt is meaningless. Why? Savar dilma misrami va'asi ben ashmashas. Because what is he concerned about? Reuven's the lender, right? Reuven's concerned about the following. Shimon's going to come one day. He's going to show up at my house, late in the evening. And what's going to happen? The kaparali. and he's going to be ready to pay me. But understandably so, Shimon the borrower is not going to want to pay unless what? Unless I give him a receipt. Di lo yahavi le lo yahav li zuzi. If I don't give him a receipt, he's not going to pay me money. Therefore, echtov ana dichi aisi li zuzi etinle. Therefore, let me just have a receipt ready. Let me just have a receipt ready in the event that he comes to go ahead and repay me, that I'm ready to go ahead and give him the receipts so that I could accept payment. So this is the position of Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, that if I, as the lender, find in my possession a receipt, whether that receipt is written, because the receipt doesn't really belong in my possession, it really belongs in the borrower's possession. So if I find it in my possession, halacha l'maisa, the receipt is meaningless. If it's meaningless, then how do I explain its existence? Either A, I ran into a sofer. It's not always easy to find the sofer, so I figured, let me just chaparai and write the receipts for me. Or even if it's in my own handwriting, we just assume that I was trying to be proactive and be ready in the event of repayment. But otherwise, again, halacha l'maisa, Rabbi Yirmiyah says, a receipt in the possession of the lender is halachically meaningless. Okay, so here we go. So we'll say, so now remember, obviously this seems to contradict the Mishnah. The Mishnah Gemara says, Tanan, im yeshima symphonos, yasem asher symphonos. So what the Mishnah said, right? The Mishnah explicitly said that if I have a pile of loan documents, right, in my possession, I'm the lender. And again, I find in that pile receipts. So the Mishnah says, we listen to the receipts, so to speak. In other words, that the receipt is valid. We assume if there's the existence of a receipt, even though again the receipt is in the possession of the lender, we assume that the debt has been paid. So the Mishnah directly contradicts Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba directly contradicts the Mishnah. To which the Gemara says, Kidam Rav Safra, shenimtza bein shtaros kiruin, hachinami shematzu bein shtaros kiruin. The Gemara say, what's the case? The case over here is that halacha l'maisa, you find this receipt amongst torn documents. Take a look at Rashi, second wide line in Rashi, ben shtaros kiruim, v'hu eino karua, lefichach somchin ala shover shemakom ashtar mochiach ala shover shu emes, shim lo nifra lo haya nosein shtar eitz ala shtaros kiruin. So Rabbi say, the case in the Mishnah is as follows. I have a pile of loan documents, and the loan documents are torn. They're torn. And again, together with those loan documents, I have a receipt that says that the borrower paid me back the money. So we'll say, generally, after a document was no longer valid, it would be torn. Now, this document wasn't torn into pieces, but it was torn. So the fact that the document was torn, coupled with the presence of the receipt, you put that all together, and what do we say? What conclusion do we come to? That the debt was paid. That's the case. That's the Mishnah's case. So it's not a contradiction. So Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba could be saying in a stamp case, where the lender has a receipt, but the loan document is fully intact. In that kind of case, we will say that, a receipt in the hand of the lender is absolutely meaningless. What about the fact that the Mishnah says that if you have receipts in your possession, it's meaningful? Not a contradiction. The Mishnah's case is where the loan documents that I have are torn, indicating again either they've been repaid or they're compromised in some way, and then the accompanying presence of the receipt indicates that indeed the receipt is authoritative, the documents have been paid. Beautiful, beautiful. We'll say this is one of these moments where the universe is in perfect equilibrium, right? Everything now makes sense, fantastic, almost like you don't want to move on. But we have to move on. That's the way it works. Says the Gemara, Tashma. Let's go right to Tashma. Nimsa le'echad ben shtarosav shtarosh Yosef ben Shimon parua. So the Gemara says, let's say like this. So it's actually very interesting. I lent money to two guys named Yosef ben Shimon. Right? Already you know where this is going, right? So two guys in my city, both named Yosef ben Shimon, right? And I lent them both money. Okay, so amongst my documents, I find that there's a loan document that says Yosef ben Shimon, right? And it says that it's parua, that it's paid back. Rashi says over here, Nimtza ben shtarosav masnisin he beget pasha shnei Yosef ben Shimon be'ir achas v'nimtza shover la'adam echad ben shtarosav v'kasabo shtarosh Yosef ben Shimon. So let's say, so I lent money to two Yosef ben Shimons, and I have one receipt in my possession that says the debt of Yosef ben Shimon is paid. Okay, now let's say, there's two things going on over here. What are the two things? Number one, it's interesting, number one, that as the lender, I have the receipt, right? Because that's not normally the way that it would work. So that's interesting by itself, right? But Lamaisa, bless you, the bigger problem over here is what? What's the bigger problem? I don't know which Yosef ben Shimon paid his debt. So what's the halacha? Shtehen peruin. Wow. The Gemara says both debts are considered paid, which essentially means, in other words, it's not that obviously both debts were not paid. What's the problem here? We'll say the problem over here is a collections issue, right? In other words, that I don't know whose debt has been paid. Clearly, someone's debt has been paid. Obviously, these Yosef and Shimon's are both smart guys. So what are they both going to say? It was me, right? It was me, right? Or it's him who didn't pay. So therefore, I really have no way to collect anything. Shnei and Peruin. So what do you see from here? Once again, this is Kashan of Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, because from here you see that the presence of a receipt in the hands of the lender is halachically significant. That contradicts Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, who said that the presence of a receipt in the hands of the lender is meaningless. So again, the Gemara says, Kidam Rav Safra, Shinim Sebein Shtaros Kiruin, Hachinami Shinim Sebein Shtaros Kiruin. So the Gemara gives the same answer. The same answer is you're talking about loan documents that are torn. While it's true that halacha l'maisa, again, I have two loan documents that say that I lent money to Yosef ben Shimon, right? And I have one receipt. So the loan documents are torn. So the fact that I have torn loan documents together with one receipt indicates that something's been paid. The receipt says Yosef ben Shimon paid. I don't know which Yosef ben Shimon. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, again, the onus is on me. That's the case. Okay. So Tashma, both say 3 lines up from the bottom, Chaf on the base. Tashma, Shvua shelo pakabnu Abba, v'shelo amar lanu Abba, v'shelo matzanu bein shtarosav shel Abba, sheshtar ze parua. So it's a very interesting case over here. So let's say Ruvain went ahead and lent money. Ruvain dies, and his Yisomim come along, and his Yisomim say like this: we have this loan document from our father, right? That people owe our father money, and we swear that our father never indicated to us that any of these documents were paid. So as far as we know, these are still outstanding debts. Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Shavua shelo pakadnu Abba, Mishnahi b'shvuas Yisomim mina Yisomim lo yifru ela b'shvua. Uma shvua. So shvua shelo pakadnu Abba b'tzavas misa shelo amar lanu kodem lochein v'shelo matzinu shover bein shtarosav shel Abba al shtar zeh shei parua im masa samchin alei. So the case over here is like this. These are actually Yisomim that want to collect from Yisomim, right? So Ruvain lent money to Shimon. Ruvain died, Shimon died. Now Ruvain's Yisomim want to go ahead and collect money from Shimon's Yisomim. So what do? They go ahead and they swear. They swear that to the best of our knowledge, we have no knowledge that our father ever collected on this debt. And therefore, again, in other words, what they say is, we don't have even a receipt in our possession. What do you see from there? That had there been a receipt in Ruvain's possession, Ruvain the lender, that receipt would have been meaningful. Once again, contradiction to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, because Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba said whenever you have a receipt in the possession of the lender, such a receipt is absolutely meaningless. To which the Gemara says, once again, Amr Rav Safra, Shenimsa bein shtaros kiruin. So we'll say the answer keeps on becoming the same thing again. Generally, you're right. Generally, the halacha will be like Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, that a receipt in the possession of the lender is going to be meaningless. Whether it's in his handwriting, the sofer's handwriting, the only time it's meaningful is when there's something that lends credence to it. What's an example of saying that lends credence to it? A torn loan document. A torn loan document seems to lend some level of credence that maybe this has been repaid. So you take that, the fact that it's torn, coupled with the fact that there is a receipt, you put that together, and kind of like where there's smoke, there's fire. So Tashma, let's go back there. Simfon sheishalav edimis kaim bechosamav. So we'll say if you have a receipt that has witnesses on it, ultimately again, you could uphold the receipt with the testimony of the witnesses. So the Gemara says, what does this mean? Ema yiskayim mechosamav. What it means is you could uphold it, in other words, through its witnesses, through its signatures. What does that mean? About the type of Chaf Aleph 21a. What does that mean? Dishailinan lahu l'sahadi. In other words, we'll say, we don't just rely on the receipt. In other words, if there is a receipt found in the possession of the lender, we don't just rely on that, even though it's a signed document. But what will we do? We'll say, you know what? Yisachar and Zvulun, they're the witnesses that signed on this shover. Let's give a call to those guys, right? Let's see what's going on with those guys. The Shailina and the Sahadi, we ask the witnesses, I parua, I lo parua. So this is interesting. So in other words, even if we adopt the position of Yomi Bar Abba, namely that halacha l'maisa, a receipt in the possession of the lender is going to be halachically meaningless. If that receipt is signed by witnesses, which Mapashta said would be, what you could do is get the witnesses in. Right? Yisachar Zvulun, you signed on this. Tell me, I'm assuming that means that you have first-hand knowledge that the debt was paid. Tell me about that. Okay, so now if you could get actual testimony about that, then Einachinami, that is going to carry weight. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Tashma, Simphon Sheishlav Eidim Kasher. If you have a Simphon, a receipt that has witnesses signed out on this kasher, my edim. So what kind of witnesses are I talking about? Eidei kiyum. So we'll say, so we're talking about again eidei kiyum. In other words, that it's a certified receipt. Rashi says over here, eidei kiyum shekasvu henpik de beidina lo mekaymi ela imkein para. So we'll say, okay, so now we're seeing another kind of twist in this. Up until now, we've been talking about an uncertified receipt. Obviously, we'll say if you have a certified receipt, Beis Din only certifies a document, or I should say, Beis Din will only certify a receipt if what? If they know with absolute certainty that repayment occurred. Okay, so now this may be a little bit different. If you have a certified receipt, that carries a tremendous amount of weight. This appears to be clear. Mediktani Seifa v'she'in alav eidim pasal. Right? If there are no witnesses on it, then ultimately it's pasal. So the Gemara says, "Ma'in alav eidim." What does it mean? It doesn't have witnesses. Ilema delakeluya eidim klal tzricha lememar the pasal. So it says, obviously, if you have a receipt and the receipt has no eidos on it, okay, then there's nothing to talk about. We'll say any document that doesn't have testimony on it is not worth the paper that it's written on. Elalav eidei kiyum. Rather, we must be talking about over here that it means is if you have a receipt that has witnesses that are part of Beis Din certification, that is a good receipt. If it doesn't have witnesses that are part of a certification, then ultimately, again, it can be challenged. So the Gemara goes weiter, Gufa, Simfon sheyesh alav eidim yiskayim bechosamav, ein alav eidim v'yotze mitachas yidei shlish. So we'll say, now watch this. And the Gemara says, quote what we said before, if you have a simphon, a receipt that has witnesses on it, yiskayim bechosamav. You could uphold the validity of the receipt through talking to the witnesses. Ein alav eidim, if there are no witnesses on it, v'yotze mitachas yidei shlish. And I will say, a third party is producing the receipt. Or this is actually interesting. What if the receipt is written on the loan document? In other words, you have a loan document, and after the signatures of the witnesses' loan document, you have a receipt written on the loan document itself, kosher. Ultimately, it works. Now, why is the Gemara says Yotzi mitachas de shlish dahem de maval shlish? Now, obviously, if you have a third party in possession of the receipt, then that would seem to indicate that the lender trusted this third party to hold on to the receipt, and that would work. La'achar chitum shtaros. Similarly, again, if your receipt goes ahead and appears on the actual loan document itself, nami, that also attests to its validity. Why? Dilav de paria lo havamari le'lishtare. I will say, remember again, that loan document, that is the mechanism of collection for the lender. If that receipt was not true, the lender would have never allowed it to be written on the document. Why? Because that will erode his ability to collect. So the fact that it's there, therefore, halacha l'maisa indicates its validity. So I will say, if we bring this all together in the wide world of receipts, what we find is as follows. So I will say, it appears that the Gemara does in fact accept the position of Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, and therefore normally when there is a receipt to be found in the possession of the lender, it's meaningless. It's meaningless. Whether the receipt was written by a sofer, the receipt was written in the own handwriting of the lender, it doesn't make a difference, it's meaningless. Except for the cases where it's meaningful, right? What are the cases where it's meaningful? So number one, if the loan document itself is torn, which seems to indicate that it was repaid, and then you have the presence of the shover, or the simphone, the presence of the receipt, that's going to indicate the validity of the receipt. Or additional cases as well, which is about say a certified receipt is valid, because Beis Din will not certify something unless they know with absolute certainty that the loan has been repaid. Or if you go ahead and you identify the witnesses signed on the receipt and ask them to testify, that could also be valid. Or if the receipt is held by a third party, also indicates validity. Or if the receipt itself is written on the loan document, then again I will say that also attests to its validity. Incredible. Anything and everything you ever wanted to know about receipts. So I'll say, Hadrin Aloch, Shnai Mochzin. Mazel Tov. Mazel Tov, I will say, our first parak in Bava Metzia, successfully under our belt. Mazel Tov, and a special Mazel Tov to Eitan Lassin on finishing the first parak of Bava Metzia. Incredible. It's probably Eitan's first siyum on a parak. Jeremy, this like, you got to take him out for dinner. This is like Serengeti. This is like, Eitan, you deserve something for this. Okay, so you deserve something for this, Emir Hashem. Incredible accomplishment. And I will say, the way it works in life is Hakol Holech Achar Asof. Everything goes by how you end. So yeah, if you show up for the last couple of blot of Shnai Mochzin, you finish the parak. That's the way it works. That's the way it works. All right, I will say, so exciting. Eila Metzias. All right, so we'll say second paragraph of Bava Metzia. Say Eila Metzias. Here we go. This is going to be a very, very, very fun ride. All of us together will say incredible. Eila Metzias Shalom ve'elu chayv lahachris. I will say there are some things in life where if you find them, they are yours. And other things where if you find them, you are obligated to announce them. Rashi says over here, Rashi already gives us kind of coming attractions with this. And ultimately, again, tells us what's going on. So Rashi says, Elu Mitzios, getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. So I'll say, so this is, so in general, so let's just frame this in the right way. I'm minding my own business, right? Walking down the street. I find something in the street. Can I keep it, or do I have to track down the owner? The answer is, it depends. It depends on the object that you are finding. So here we go. For example, Eilu Metzia Shalo. So I'll say, let's go through some examples ultimately of some things in life where if you find them, they are yours. They are yours. So the Gemara says, Eilu Metzia Shalo, Matzah Peiros Mifuzarin. So I'll say, if you find scattered fruit, maos mifuzaros, or scattered money, krichos birshus harabim, or you find small sheaves in the public domain, igule dvela, a cake of pressed figs, kikara shel nachtum, so baker's loaves. We'll say we're going to talk about this in the Gemara, that there are two different types of loaves of bread. There's what we call kikaros nachtum, which are baker's loaves, mass-produced loaves, versus kikara shel balabayis, homemade bread. What's the difference? Baker's loaves, mass-produced, every loaf looks the same, right? Home-baked bread, homemade bread, everybody's homemade bread looks different. Okay, so therefore, baker's bread, machruzo shel dagim, a string of fish, and again we'll discuss these cases as well. Chaticho shel basar, a piece of meat. Gizeit semer, tufts of wool. So the Gemara says halukuchim and medinasan that come from their respective places. Vanitze pishtan, or again tufts of flax. Lishonos shel argaman, tufts of purple wool. Hare elu shel divrei Rabbi Meir. So as Rabbi Meir says, these are all examples of things where if you find them, you're allowed to keep them. Now, what's the logic? What's the logic in all of these things? We're going to see these items don't have simanim. They don't have identifiable marks. They're not unique. So because they're not unique, when the owner loses them, he has what we're going to call yeyosh. So we'll say yeyosh, we've seen yeyosh many times before. Yeyosh means despair, right? Yeyosh means a person gives up hope of ever retrieving these items because they are so nondescript. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, because he has yeyosh, they effectively become hefker, ownerless, and because they are ownerless, therefore if I find them, I have the right to keep them. That's our first list. If you take a look at Rashi, Rashi says, first Rashi over here, he says, Mos mefuzarin, nisyaishu habaylim mehen, kidam regimar v'hefkerhein. So I'll say again, because the common denominator amongst all of the items listed in the Mishnah is they're all nondescript, right, or mass-produced. They have no identifying siman, and therefore, again, the owner has yeyosh, despairs of ever retrieving. Once there is yeyosh, the object becomes hefker. Once it becomes hefker, I, the finder, have the ability to keep it. That's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Huda says, Kol sheyish bo shinui chayiv lahachris. So Rabbi Huda says that any item that you find that has something unique about it, you are obligated to go ahead and announce it. If you find it, you're obligated to announce it. We'll say, obviously, we're going to discuss the mechanism for tracking down the owner of an object. But you're obligated to announce that you found it. For example, what's the example of a shinui? Kezad, matzah igul ubesocho cheres. You find a cake of pressed figs, and inside of it is a pottery shard. What I just want to point out, what Rabbi Huda is coming along and saying is as follows: that obviously the Mishnah just gave a list of items that are generally nondescript, no siman. So Rabbi Huda just points out, by the way, you can have a case of a nondescript item that has some unique, peculiar future. So, for example, in the Mishnah, an example of something that is nondescript is a cake of pressed figs. Why I will say, every cake of pressed figs looks the same. So it says, fine. However, if you happen to come upon a cake of pressed figs and you notice there's something unique about this, for example, there is a pottery shard embedded in a cake of pressed figs, that's a shinui. That's a shinui. That's something unique, and therefore that's going to require you to announce the fact that you found it. Kikar, you find a loaf of bread, and inside of the loaf of bread is money. So again, a loaf of bread by itself, especially the loaf of bread of a baker, is a nondescript item that generally, again, we assume the owner has yeyosh and you could keep it. If there's something unique inside of the loaf, that is going to require you to announce it. Okay, Rabbi Shimon Elazar Omer Kol Klian Poria Ein Chayv Lahachar. Rabbi Shimon Elazar says ultimately Kol Klian Poria. Now we'll say what Rashi says over Klian Poria. B'Gemar Mefarish. We'll see in the Gemara exactly what that is, but Rabbi Shimon Elazar says that halacha l'maaseh you are obligated to announce it if you found it. Okay, incredible. We'll say that is our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, Matzah peras mefuzar v'kama. So we'll say here's what's interesting. So the Mishnah said that if you find scattered fruit, it's interesting. It's interesting that the Mishnah makes this distinction between things you find in life that are yours, versus things that you find in life that you have to seek out the owner. It's an incredible metaphor, I think, in life in general, that as we go through life, there are things that we come upon, right? Things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu kind of puts our way. And there are some things that come our way because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to use it for ourselves. And there are other things in life that HaKadosh Baruch Hu kind of puts in our lives. Why? Because He wants us to use them for others. Once if use them for others, and sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that all of the brachos we have, all of the metzias, because I'll say, to be clear, nothing in life that I have is mine. Everything that I have in life is found. It's all found. It's a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So there are certain things in life, certain metzias that you have that are shalom. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to use it for you. But then there are other things that you find in life, chayiv l'hachris. You got to figure out, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave this to me, but maybe it's not for me. Maybe it's not for me. Maybe it's for you. Maybe it's for my community. Maybe it's for my klal. And kind of understanding the things that you should use for you versus the things which you should use to build the klal, the community around you. It's a very fine science, right? What's for me, what's shalom, and what's chayv lahachris, something that requires a tremendous amount of thought, because all too often in life, there are beautiful brachos that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has kind of given us that we sit on and that we keep for ourselves. And meanwhile, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, no, you get it wrong. I didn't give that to you for you. I gave that to you to make a difference in the lives of those around you. You're chayiv lahachriz, that particular bracha. Okay, when to know which one is to be used for which? That's the great mystery of life. Let's go back there. Says the Gemara, Matzah peras mevuzar v'kama. So we'll say, let's talk about the case of scattered fruit. So the Mishnah said that scattered fruit you are permitted to keep. So as I said, obviously, what's the shaila? What's the definition of scattered? right? Now remember, there's two things that go into scattered. Number one is amount. Number two, area. So what's the definition of scattered? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yitzchak, kav ba'arba amos. Rabbi Yitzchak says, a kav of fruit scattered in arba amos. So we'll say, so just by the way, just like give you illustration purposes, so we know, so arba amos is an area of 6 feet. So that we know, dalet amos. A kav, just like in volume measurements, is somewhere between like 2 and 3 quarts. So just to give you like a volume measurement. So the area, so an amount of about between 2 and 3 quarts and an area of about 6 feet. That's considered to be scattered. Okay, kav ba'arba amos. So the Gemara says, Rashi says over here, is interesting. Kav mefuzar ba'arba amos aval b'gimel amos lo b'pizer v'tayim farish v'azos. So we'll say that. Listen to this. So what's the case? I derech nefila. If it's talking about where it's clear that the produce was dropped, right? In other words, inadvertently dropped, then afilu tuvanami. So we'll say, then ultimately, again, even if it's more than a kav, it should still become hefker, right? Why? Because we'll say if it's clear that someone dropped it, right? And remember, it's fruit, so there's no siman. Then I will say a person certainly has yeush on fruit that they drop in Rishus Harabim, in a public domain, right? Because halacha l'maisa, there's no real way to retrieve it. So even if it's more than a kav, it should become yeush. And I will say, if it is clear that the produce was placed down with intentionality, I don't know, it was the apples are assembled in a pyramid. So that's obviously somebody put it down intentionally. Then in that case, we'll say that obviously if there's intentionality, then it doesn't become hefker, right? Then there's no yeyosh. Then even less than a kav, you shouldn't be able to keep it. So what's the case? Machnashda de Beidari Askinon. Well, so we're actually talking about produce that is left on the threshing floor. Take a look at Rashi. Machnashda de Beidari, Bishas Asifas Granos, Vikan Dashan Ba'alehen, V'nos V'se'ikr V'nos Re'elu. So what are we talking about here, boss? We're talking about, let's say, a publicly used threshing floor. So what happened? Someone left behind produce. So I bring my produce to the threshing floor. Apparently, it wasn't uncommon, right? After you threshed, you gather up your produce. At a certain point, certain produce is left behind simply because it's not worth the effort. So what's an example of the amount of produce that a person would commonly leave behind on the threshing floor because it's not worth the effort of gathering it up? A kav of produce within dalet amos. Right? That's the amount where, again, it's not worth the tircha. It's not worth the tircha. So the Gemara says, kav ba'arba amos dinafish tarchayu lo tarich inshi. So therefore, again, a kav of produce spread out over an area of dalet amos, it's not worth the effort. The effort is not, in other words, there's no good return on investment with that. It's too much effort for too little produce. So the Gemara says, velo hadr asi v'shakalahu afkuri mafkalahu. So ultimately, again, Rabbi say it's not worth the effort, and therefore, a person is mafkirit. But Rabbi say, for example, if you have a kav and it's spread out in less than dalet amos, then ultimately, again, that's not as much tircha, not as much effort. That effort is worth it, and a person would come back for that produce, and therefore, it's not hefker. It's not after. Okay. So Rabbi Yirmiyah asked an interesting question. What about half a kav in 2 amos? So I'll say, so what do you have in this case? It's half the produce, but also it's spread out over half the space. So therefore, there's a much smaller area of dispersion. So what is that? So do we say on one hand, kav ba'arba amos taimamai? So why is it that if there is a kav in arba amos that it's normally hefker, taimamai mishum dinafish tarchayu? Because we'll say it's a lot of effort to kind of collect stuff over an area of dalet amos. But if it's only spread over 2 amos, right? But if it's half a kav, even though it's half the produce, but it's also spread out over half the area, That's not such a tircha, and therefore a person won't be mafkir it. O dilma, mishum delo chashiv v'chatzi kav b'shtei amos kevun delo chashiv mafkir. On the other hand, let's say maybe it's also that in general a kav of produce is not considered to be a chashiv amount, and therefore a person is mafkir it. Certainly a half a kav is not going to be a chashiv amount, and a person will be mafkir it. Okay, what about another case? Kabayim b'shmona amos. Ooh, what happens if you left behind 2 kavim in 8 amos? So double the produce, dispersed over double the space. So mahu, what's the halacha? On one hand, kav ba'arba amos taimamai. Why is it that a kav in arba amos is generally considered to be hefker? Mishum denafish tarchayu. Because it's a lot of effort to start collecting produce over an area of dalat amos. V'chol shekin kabayim b'shmona amos kevan denafish tarchayu tfei mafkilu. And certainly, again, what? Certainly, if you have 2 kavim over 8 amos, 8 amos is even a bigger area, that's even a bigger pain. Certainly a person is going to be mafkir. O dilma, mishum delo chashivi, or maybe no, maybe it's because 1 kav is not chashuv, v'kabayim b'shmona amos, kevin de chashivi lo mafkir lehu. On the other hand, if you have 2 kavs, right, 2 kavim in 8 amos, that's much more chashiv, and therefore again a person is not going to be mafkirit. Okay, another case. Kav shumshumin ba'arba amos mahu. Both say, what happens if it's not produce, right, or not fruit, but sesame seeds? Sesame seeds, a kav of sesame seeds in 4 amos, right? So we'll say, so now what's the status of that? First white line at the bottom. Kav ba'arba amos taimamai. Why is it in general that a kav in arba amos is going to be hefker? Mishum delo chashivi, because it's not chashiv. V'shum shemin, we'll say, but sesame seeds apparently are a high ticket item. So shum shemin kevan de chashivi lo mafkir. We'll say people are not mafkir sesame seeds, right? And therefore, again, even a kav of sesame seeds in dalat amos would not be afker. O dilma mishum de nafish tarchayu. Or maybe again, I will say this. Generally, a kav of produce in dalat amos, there's a lot of tircha involved in collecting it. I will say, can you imagine the tircha collecting sesame seeds? V'kol shekin shum shemin kevan de nafish tarchayu tfei mafkir. Or maybe again, I will say, a kav of sesame seeds, where there's even more tircha involved, it's certainly going to be mafkir. Another case, kav tami ba'arba amos, kav rimoni ba'arba amos mahu. So we'll say, so what about if you left behind, right, you find a kav of dates or a kav of pomegranates? And I will say, now what's the chap with dates and pomegranates? They're larger, so because they're larger, they're easier to collect. So what do you say? Is a person mafkir this or not? Mau kav ba'arba amos taimai mishum delo chashivi, kav tarn ba'arba amos, kav rimoni ba'arba amos nami kevun delo chashivi mafkilu. So on one hand, is the reason why a kav in arba amos is hefker is because a kav in arba amos is not chashuv, and therefore same thing, a kav of dates or a kav of pomegranates in this area is also not chashuv, so maybe it's hefker. O dilma mishum denafishi tarchayu, or maybe generally the reason why it's hefker is because it's a lot of effort to collect these items. A lot of effort involved in collecting these items, and ultimately, again, there would still be a lot of, and therefore, when it comes to kaftani ba'arba amos, kavimoni ba'arba amos, kevin the lo nafish tarchayu lo mafkir. We'll say, but there isn't a lot of effort involved in collecting a kav of dates or pomegranates in an area of dalat amos. Why? Because they're large, and therefore maybe they're not hefker. So we'll say, what's the answer to all of these questions? All of these previous cases, my teku. Okay, for Eliyahu Navi. So we'll say, so what is our takeaway? Our takeaway is that halacha, we just want a definition. What is the definition of peiros mifuzarin in the Mishnah? Right? The Mishnah said if I find scattered fruit, right, it is considered to be that the owner has despaired of retrieving them, and therefore I, the finder, am permitted to keep it. What is the definition of scattered fruit? A kav of fruit scattered over an area of dalat amos. That's it. What about all of these nuanced cases? We'll have to leave it for Eliyahu Hanavi. And I will say, as we say every single time, Teku teaches us, Teku is Chazal reminding us that there are certain questions for which we cannot find answers. There are many things in life that we wonder why. So we'll say, but yet I don't have the answer. So what does a yid do when you don't have an answer? What does a yid do when you come to a Teku? We'll say, what do? Itmar. You move forward. You move forward. You don't become paralyzed in life because of the questions you can't answer. You file them. You recognize one day, the day of answers will come. But until that day, we keep moving forward. Itmar, here we go. I'll say the very exciting Itmar Amud days. Yeyosh Shalomi Das. Oh, okay, here we go. I'll say Yeyosh Shalomi Das. Here we go. Very exciting sugya. So what's Yeyosh Shalomi Das? Look at Rashi. Tap Rashi on Chafal from Beis. Yeyosh Shalomi Das. Rashi says, "Davar shestamo Yeyosh l'chishiyad shnafo mimenu ukishamotzu adayin lo yadu habayim shnafo mimenu." Both say, watch this. Yeyosh Shalomi Das. Following case. What happens? Right, Reuven's walking down the street. Reuven loses something. Right, Reuven loses something, and he lost the type of item that right now Reuven does not know that he lost the object, right? Now, but when he does find this out, it's going to be the kind of thing that is going to have yeyosh on, right? I'll just give you a very simple example, right? Reuven is walking down the street, he loses a $20 bill. Right? They both say money is something where if you lose it, there's no way you're getting it back. Right? No way you're getting it back. Money doesn't really have a siman, right? Money doesn't have an identifiable mark. So right now, Reuven has no idea that he lost it. When he knows it, he will have yeyosh. But right now, he doesn't have yeyosh, right? Why? Why? Because he doesn't know that he lost it. Meanwhile, again, I find it. But I find it before Reuven knows that he lost it. That is called Yeyosh Shalomi Das. So on one hand, again, Reuven right now doesn't have Das. He doesn't have Yeyosh because he doesn't know that he lost it. But when he does find out, he's going to have Yeyosh. But I find the object before he actually experienced Yeyosh. So what is the halacha? What is the halacha in such a case like that? Can I keep it or can't I keep it? So Abaye says, Lo havi yeyosh. Abaye says, that is not the yeyosh. That is not the yeyosh. For Rava, Rava says, no, havi yeyosh. All right, here we go. Fundamental machlokas Abaye and Rava. This is where it gets exciting. So here we go. B'davar sheish bo simin. So both say, if the object that Reuven lost has a simin, koli amalo pligi de lo havi yeyosh. So both say, so obviously, if it has a simin, everyone agrees, has some identifying mark. And I will say, obviously, we're going to talk about in the world of simanim, what is considered to be a siman and what is not a siman. So we'll get into that. So if the object itself has a siman, everyone agrees that it's not yeyosh. Right? Why? Right? L'sof. And even though if I hear later on that Reuven in fact did have yeyosh, lo have yeyosh, dechi asi liyadei bi'isura hu da asa liyadei, dechi yada denafal minei lo miyayish. Meimar amar simna isli bigavei, yehevna simna v'shakil nalei. So we'll say it goes without saying like this: if Reuven loses something and and the object has a siman, and I find it, so certainly I can't keep it. Why, Rabbi say? Because since the object has a siman, right, the assumption is that Reuven is not miyayish. Why is Reuven not miyayish? Why is he not miyayish? So listen, I have a siman. So because I have a siman, therefore I have the ability to retrieve the object. And because I have the ability to retrieve the object, therefore halacha l'maisa, I'm going to get it back. And I will say, even if I hear later on that Reuven says, I'm miyayish. Even though, again, he's maybe miyayish later on, at the time that the object came into my possession, ultimately, again, there was no yeyosh and no anticipation of yeyosh because the object has a siman, and therefore, again, it does not belong to me. So I'll say, that's going to be a case where everyone agrees. Fine. The Gemara says, Bezuto shalyam or bishliluso shalnar. Similarly, again, I will say, let's say, again, I'm walking, and I see Reuven lose an object. And Reuven's walking by the banks of the ocean. He drops the object, and the sea washes away the object, or the river overflows and washes away the object. In that case, Rabbi say, afagav the ispe simin rachmana shar yakidaba'in lemimar lekaman. Rabbi say, we're going to see later on that if you lose an object that has a simin, but it was washed away by the ocean or washed away by the river, there's yeyosh. Right? There's yeyosh. Right? Logically. Why? Because the owner says to himself, again, even though I might have the best siman in the object, that's gone. That is gone. Nothing more to talk about. So keep pligi. So we'll say, where's the machlokes case? Here we go. B'davar she'ein bo siman. So we'll say, the machlokes is in the case of where Reuven is walking down the street, loses an object, right? What kind of object does he lose? What kind of object? No siman, no identifying mark. Reuven does not know he lost the object. So I find it even before Reuven knows that he lost it. So I'll say, so now watch this. This is fascinating. So watch this. The object is the type of object. What is going to be Reuven's eventual response when he realizes that he lost it? What's going to be his eventual response? Yesh, right? Yesh. The difference just is he doesn't know that he lost it now, so there is no yesh yet, but I found it already. So what's talacha? What's talacha? Abai Amar lo havi yesh. Abai says it's not yesh. It's not yesh. Why? So Gemara says the ha lo yada the nafal minei. Abai says it's not yesh. You know what I'm saying? Yesh is not like some kind of hocus pocus thing. What's yesh? What's yesh? I own an object. I lose the object. I despair hope of retrieving the object. That's yesh, and then it's hefker. If I don't know that I lost it, then ultimately, again, you can't claim yesh. If you can't claim yesh, it's not hefker. If it's not hefker, then you, the finder, have no right to keep it. It is mine. That's Abaye. Rava Amar Havi yesh. Rava says, no, it is yesh. Why? Because Rabbi said, listen, Rava says, we could see how this story ends. Right? We know how the story ends. It's true. Right now, Reuven doesn't know that he lost the $10 bill, right? He doesn't know that he lost the apple. He doesn't know that he lost the nondescript item. But we know the story. We know the script. Right? When he goes in and he realizes that he lost it, there's only one reaction that he's going to have, and that's what? I'm never getting this back. Right? And he's going to have yesh. So the Gemara says, Amar simna lesle bigabe, because he knows he has no simna in this object. Therefore, again, mehashta hu demiyayish. Sefer Rabbi say, because we know how the story ends, it's almost as if we're able to go ahead and retroactively superimpose, right, the ending on the beginning. So we'll say, so pretty much, I know that this is a yesh scenario. So because it's in a yesh scenario, therefore, again, essentially, retroactively, so to speak, the yesh sets in from the moment that Reuven lost the object. That's what's unfolding over there. So therefore, I will say, fundamental machlokes Abaye and Rava, yesh shalomi das. Reuven loses something, he does not know that he lost the object. It's the type of object where ultimately, again, he normally would have yesh, but he doesn't have yesh yet. Abaye says, I can't keep it. Yesh is yesh. Yesh only occurs when the owner knows that he's lost it and has actively given up hope of retrieving it. Therefore, if you find it before yesh, you can't keep the object. Rava says, no, we know where the story is headed. So because we know the story is headed, essentially, halacha essentially says, so I'll say, essentially according to Rava, Rava says, the halacha says, Reuven, you're miyayish. You don't know that you're miyayish, but you're miyayish already. Why? Because when you find out, you're going to realize in the moment that you lost it, you really were miyayish, and therefore, again, it's really yesh as of now. Hefker, you could keep it. You know, say just before we go on, I'll just tell you there is a beautiful, beautiful kutzker. The kutzker says, I will say, this is incredible. What's our topic? Yesh shalomi das. The kutzker says, in life, sometimes people have yesh, right? In life, people sometimes give up hope. Even though Rabbi Nachman says, Ein shun yesh ba'olam klal. There's no such thing as giving up. A yid never gives up. A yid never gives up hope. A yid never falls into the clutches of despair. So the Rebbe says, so what happens in life if you experience yesh? Says the Kutzker, it's only shalomi das. It's only because you're not thinking clearly. It's only because your das is not intact. If your das was intact, if you had your wits about you, he says, Adam sheba lichlal yeyosh, a person who comes to yeyosh, harizerak michoser das. It's only because you're overwhelmed by your life circumstances. It's only because you're overwhelmed by the particular situation at hand. It's only because your das is compromised. Mishyesh lo das, because someone who has true das, someone whose das is intact, Eino misya'ish li olam, never experiences any kind of yesh. And I will say this is so incredibly important to know, that the power of a Jew, the greatest power of the Jew is that we never experience yesh. And when we do experience yesh, feelings of despair, it's only because my das has been compromised. It's only because I'm so overwhelmed by my circumstances that I'm not thinking clearly. And I will say this is so important to know, because in life, there are times in life where we experience despair, where we give up hope. It's kind of important to give yourself like a little zetz on the cheek, to give yourself like a little slap, like splash a little cold water on your face, and just say, the only reason I'm feeling this way is because of the enormity of my circumstances have compromised my life outlook, have compromised my das. Because in reality, the power of the Jew is there is no such thing as yeyosh in my life. No such thing as hashkafic yeyosh. Halachic yeyosh, absolutely. But no such thing as hashkafic yeyosh. And if I am experiencing that yeyosh, that's ultimately shalomi das. I'm not thinking clearly. Let me gather my wits about me. Let me get my das intact again, and I will realize there is no such thing as hopelessness for the Yid. Ein shum yeyosh ba'olam klal. Whole Masechta is worth it for that. Okay, let's go weiter. Tashma. So what I say, this is our Machlokes Abaye and Rava. Back to our regularly scheduled program. Right? So we're in the middle of our Machlokes Abaye and Rava. See, here we go. Tashma. Peros mifuzarin. All right, so as I say now, the Gemara is going to kind of launch a number of challenges from the Mishnah. Right, so what did the Mishnah say? I find scattered fruit. So I'll say, what does the Mishnah say in the case of scattered fruit? I'll say, I'm walking down the street. I see scattered fruit. What's the halacha? What's the halacha? I can keep it. The Gemara says, Halo yada dinafal minei. But 1 second. Bepashtas, the owner of the fruit, doesn't know that he dropped it. In other words, why do I assume that the owner knows that he dropped it? Maybe he didn't drop it. And isn't this a case of yesh shalom das? And what do you see? What's talacha? What's talacha? I'm allowed to keep it. What does that show you? That yesh shalom das is like Rava. It's yesh. It's a braya to Rava. Kashan abaye. Ha'amar Rav Ukva barchama hacha b'machnashta debizri askinon davei demidasi. No, remember, how do we set up this case? This is a case of threshing floor. Case of threshing floor. Rabbi say this is a case where Ruvain actively left behind produce, right? He decided it wasn't worth his while to gather this back up. So it's not a case of yesh shalom das. He knows full well that he left this produce behind, and therefore that's why I'm allowed to keep it. Rabbi say, you know what we'll do? We'll stop over here today. We're fine, by the way. Do not get nervous. We are absolutely fine. A lot of short dapim, like in a couple of weeks, coming our way. I'll say again, it's like fine wine. Just because, right, you're not going to gulp it. You're not going to gulp it. So we're not going to gulp down Gemara. We have plenty of time. So we'll stop here. So again, we're leaving off with the mitzvah Machlokes Abaye and Rava. Emir Hashem will clarify it a bit more tomorrow. Shkoyach Mazel Tov on the siyum of the first parak, and tremendous Mazel Tov starting Elam Metzias. Shkoyach Chevra. All right, Chevra on Zoom. Have a great day, everyone. Good to see everyone. Really a schos. Mazel Tov on finishing Shnai Mochsen, Mazel Tov on beginning of Metzias. Incredible.
The first Gemara.
Right, Metzias. Hopefully it brings back good memories. Good memories.